In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise, in God alone I trust, I will not be afraid. What can mortal man do to me?
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Preterist Apologetics. My name is Don K. Preston, and over here is my good friend, Michael Sullivan. We are so glad for you to join us again. We appreciate the fact that these videos continue to garner an awful lot of interest and viewership. We ask you to, when we put these on YouTube, be sure to hit the like and the share and all that kind of stuff you do on technology. So before we get started, I think Mike said he had a little bit of an announcement. So Mike, go ahead.
Yes. We hadn't really talked about this publicly. We had talked about Doug Wilson. We had talked about the fact that we had challenged Doug Wilson to a debate. And then some other folks said, hey, wait a second. We don't think that that would give enough exposure. Why don't we do a kind of a movie documentary where Doug Wilson and maybe someone like Jeff Durbin, I think they were trying to reach out to Ken Gentry, Keith Matheson as well, to represent the partial preterist. So we would have some questions on our end that we would give them. They would have questions. They would give it to me and Don, and we were going to have a documentary. And it was I think Darren, what's Darren's last name? Darren Doan was going to kind of direct this or produce it. And Rick Welch, our friend with Burroughs of Berea, was going to kind of put up the money. And some of the money was going to go to the charity of our choice. Yep. Kind of hoping that Doug, just really wouldn't pull out of this. There's no reason why he would. Well, and I already had a gut feeling that Doug was going to pull out of this because he pulled out of a debate with me. And it's just been so many years since he wrote his chapter in When Shall These Things Be? And sure enough, he pulled out of it. And this was his reasoning. Apparently, he wanted all the rights, all the final editing rights to go to Darren. And Darren is a member of Doug's church.
Yes.
And Darren's, I'm sure, a great guy. I mean, I had a really good conversation with him, about an hour long. Great guy. But Rick is the one that's kind of paying for all this.
Yeah.
All right. And so Rick wrote back to Doug and said, well, I'm going to give you a soft yes on that. But we would like to all sit down together and discuss it a little bit. And Darren, it seemed in my conversation with him, if I remember right, he was okay with the fact that we all had the footage. So if in the final edit and cut, they misrepresented us or left some things out, we had the full thing on tape, and we could say, hey, wait a second, I responded to this here, and that's all right. So everyone had it. Well, that just was not acceptable for some reason for Mr. Wilson. And so he just took his ball and went home again. Now, this is a man who constantly says he just doesn't have time to debate full preterism. But notice how he has all kinds of time in the world to do podcast after podcast after podcast after podcast, slamming full preterists. If he has that much time to do that, why can't he just debate us? He's got a lot of questions that need to be answered that he's not answering in those podcasts where he slams full preterism. And I think it's shameful. I think it's despicable. And, if we're not going to do the documentary, Doug, let's go back to the original idea, which was a partner debate. You and Jeff Durbin, you guys have a lot in common. You take the end of the age in Matthew 24 as the Old Covenant age. You take 2 Peter 3 as AD 70. Look, that's all Don and I really need. Just to kind of sweep the floor with you.
Yeah.
But, you have a lot in common there. Why don't you guys partner up and we'll just do what we wanted to do in the original, which was the original idea, just have a partner debate and get this settled. But I just don't. These guys just will never do it, apparently. So.
Well, yeah, that is rather sad, but I was exactly like you when we started pursuing a debate. I just had that deep down gut feeling based upon what I had read and what I had heard from and about Doug. I just didn't feel like he was willing to get on a polemic platform of any kind, to where we were going to have the opportunity to ask questions, to do interactions, to do cross examinations, et cetera, et cetera. I just didn't feel like Doug wanted to be a part of that. He wants to be able, how should I express this with all due respect? He wants to be able to lob missiles into our camp without any opportunity for us to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, I mean, after all, there are only 14 of us, Mike. So why should he worry about?
Yeah. Right.
So anyway, it's really sad. I know that Darren's got to be disappointed with that because Darren had certainly talked an awful lot about the possibility. But for someone to suggest that as a simple participant in a project like that, that he has exclusive rights, all editorial rights, not the man who's funding it. I'm sorry, that's not even kosher. That opens the door for all sorts of abuse. And I'm sorry, I have learned down through the years, this is not a personal attack against Doug Wilson, but I've learned down through the years that the opponents of covenant eschatology, many, many, many of them, and again, I'm not singling out Doug Wilson. I don't know if he would or not. We already know he's misrepresented us on certain things, however. But down through the years, the opponents of covenant eschatology have been quite good at totally misrepresenting the things that we actually believe. I can't tell you the number of times that I've read, transcripts of sermons in which the preacher was going, well, full preterists believe, and I'm going, what preterist believes that? I don't know if anybody believes.
I write these people, I say, I've been a preterist over 30 years. I don't know anyone that believes what you're saying. I mean, I have to do that constantly.
Yeah, it's just like Steve Gregg in his book, Why Not Full Preterism, said full preterists believe that Daniel chapter 12 is the only passage on resurrection.
I know, I remember.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, I literally just sat back when I read that for the first time and I go, no, I didn't read that. I read it 5 times going, okay, what am I missing here? And it's what he said, that preterists rely strictly on Daniel chapter 12 for the doctrine of the resurrection. I mean, talk about a total misrepresentation, blatant falsehood. So again, to go back to the point, for Doug as an opponent of covenant eschatology that we already know has misrepresented us on occasions, to demand the full, total editorial authority over the transcripts, no. No, that should not be allowed by the man who's paying for the event under any circumstance. I would never agree to that personally.
Yeah, and Rick was so, Rick. I mean, he has a soft disposition, and he's just a gracious man. And he was like, I'm going to give you a soft yes. Like he was trying to bend over backwards with Doug, and Doug still didn't like it. And Darren was like, hey, all of you guys have rights. You can sell it. You can do whatever you want. But Doug still wanted the final editorial rights to be in Darren's hands. But Darren is a member of Doug's church. Yeah. And I mean, that still doesn't really give me the feeling of neutrality completely.
No.
And so, I understand.
And I want to say this, okay? My interaction with Darren has been like yours, super nice guy. I believe that he would try to be objective. However, if Doug is the one that is saying, here, you put this in, you leave this out as the ultimate editor, then it would be out of Darren's hands.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. It's absolutely not fair.
I agree.
You know, every time that I've had a formal public debate, when I thought it might be something worth publishing, okay, I have had an agreement, a written formal agreement, contract, if you please, with the other guy that said, pardon me, the book, a book, if I publish it or if you publish it, the book will be published or the debate will be published, including every single thing that was said. No alterations, no deletions, no subtractions.
Mm.
When the manuscript for the book is ready, it will be submitted to the other guy by the person doing the publishing. And the other guy has up to 30 days, 45 days, maybe even 90 days, if that's necessary, to read the manuscript and to make any suggestions. Say, well, I believe this needs to be cleared up grammatically, editorially, blah, blah, blah.
Right. Yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
If it's grammar, sure, no problem whatsoever. If it's spelling, no problem whatsoever. But again, no changes to the material content of the debate and no alterations, no changing of anything that was said to change the meaning of what was said. And
Right.
every man's agreed with that. You know, every single one that I've published a debate with has agreed to that. I haven't given total editorial control to anyone at all. That's always a shared responsibility, and the other guy has to agree and approve of the final approval of the final manuscript before it goes to publish.
Right.
Now, if Doug wanted to agree to that, that would be another issue. Might be something
I
that
don't. Doug just doesn't want.
I don't think it matters.
Yeah, he just doesn't want to do it. He'd rather go on and do these one-sided drive-by hit pieces and these podcasts attacking full preterists. But if we're so insignificant, why does he have to do this all the time? I mean, he does quite a bit of them, actually.
He does. He has produced a good number of videos. Yeah. And you know, he's comical. He's may I say eloquent even. He's not very deep theologically. That's the problem.
No, he's not. And he doesn't want to deal with the inconsistencies of his hermeneutic. And that's the real issue.
That's the real issue. It's just like I've said many, many times, a point you made a few moments ago. He says he doesn't have time to debate us, and yet he has all this time to make podcasts. Well, Kenneth Gentry has been debated, has been issued challenges to debate me at least 15 times. And, oh, I'm too busy. And yet he finds the time to write lengthy articles against covenant eschatology.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over again. So the bottom line is, if he was willing to debate, if he thought for a moment he could actually win a debate, I mean, after all, let's face it, Mr. Gentry, if you think that you have the goods, Doug Wilson, if you think you've got the goods to destroy covenant eschatology, put it to shame, rout it completely, then meet us in formal debate and humiliate us.
Yeah, or even have a written debate with us if you want.
Amen.
You know, we could have, you know, one of those books, you know, two different views, and it's just a partial preterist, full preterist debate, chapter length, they're all the same. And we'll just do it and let but they don't want other people to watch them be cross-examined.
That's right.
And that is just what is so shameful about these guys. And in the end, causes our view to continue to grow.
No
I
doubt.
mean, I have at least two very prominent individuals contact me and say, you know, the thing that pushed me over into full preterism is how they dealt with Gary DeMar. I mean, it was so shameful. It was so cowardly. It was so pathetic. It just showed me that these guys don't have the arguments. They won't answer the questions. And, you know, they would answer questions to any other quote unquote heretical view, but they won't with us. And that communicates so much to a lot of people that study and that really take the time to analyze this stuff. And so here we are again. And I guess
There are an
we'll just
awful lot of people out there that when they see two guys going in different directions, and the one is saying, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. Come on, let's communicate. Instead of throwing stones, let's communicate. And the other guy said, no, I don't have time to mess with you. You're a heretic. There are an awful lot of people that go, wait a minute. Christianity has advanced through the centuries, through the millennia, through debate. Let's face it.
Yep.
Christianity has advanced on the heels of debate. And yet here, and the irony of this, of course, as you well know, let me see. Kenneth Gentry is Reformed. Doug Wilson is Reformed.
Right.
How did the Reformed movement get started?
Yeah, exactly.
A 95
Questioning and
thesis
challenging.
for public challenge to debate.
Yeah, yeah.
And yet here they claim to be following in the heels of, Martin Luther and John Calvin and what have you. But no, we're not going to debate. No, sir, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, yeah. It communicates, unfortunately, way too much. But so having discussed that, I just wanted to do just a couple of minutes of a follow-up on Psalm 110. And then I know you want to get in and develop more of the harvest theme. And, Paul is quoting Psalm 110, and we've already dealt with Luke 19. We've dealt with, in past episodes, we went through pretty much the majority of the New Testament where Psalm 110 is quoted, and we've shown you the AD-70 fulfillment, especially in Hebrews chapter 10, 12 through 37. But here's another issue that I get a lot. And partial preterists, futurists, they say, well, wait a second, Mike, just look out the window. I don't see all of Christ's enemies put under his feet yet. And this is an interesting objection, especially coming from some Calvinists, because, whenever Christ's atonement is talked about for the whole world, we'll get into the 7 different uses of world. That doesn't mean every single person on the planet. Or if God desires that all men be saved, we've got to look at the context, and it's referring to all kinds of men, or Jew and Gentile. Okay, different kinds, not every single person that's ever lived on the planet. And Don, when we come to Matthew 16, 27, 28, and Revelation 22, 12, let me read these passages and you tell me what you think sticks out to you. The Son of Man will come with his angels in the glory of his Father and will judge all people according to their deeds. Some standing right here will not die before the Son of Man comes in his kingdom. Now, all people, were all people judged in AD 70? Well, we're told by the partial preterists, absolutely. This is hyperbole. Revelation 22, 12, and behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give to every man according as his work shall be. Well, was every man rewarded in AD 70? Every. And we're looking at all people here in these two passages, and yet we're told that that was fulfilled in AD 70. But somehow, if we say that all enemies here is referring to a historical, contextual set of people that these other two passages are dealing with as well, well, again, like I said before, the partial preterist is scared to death to see his hermeneutic be exposed to be that arbitrary and inconsistent hermeneutic. And this is just one of those areas. The other objection I get constantly on Psalm 110 and 1 Corinthians 15 is, Mike, again, we need to look out the window. It's the look out the window hermeneutic.
That's what I started to say. It's a look out the window hermeneutic.
Right. Yeah, on one hand, we're told, oh, it's so easy to refute full preterism. Everyone just has to look out the window. And then on the other end, they're scared to death to debate us. So I'm not really sure how they jive that together. But the other objection is, Mike, obviously look out the window. Death has not been destroyed. I mean, let's go down to the graveyard. I mean, look, death is still taking place. And of course, Don, we'll get into this a little bit here at some point when we cover the present passive indicative and what death was in the process of being destroyed, but it's not biological death. When Jesus says, "He who believes in me will never die," right? He's not talking about biological death.
I think that's pretty clear.
Revelation, yeah. In Revelation, when there's no more death, that's the same thing as John is talking about in John 8 and John 10. So those are just a couple objections I usually get on Psalm 110 that I just wanted to throw out there. And if you have any other things that would
well, let me
complement
follow up on that with an argument that I made when I debated Anthony Aquino, which he didn't touch top side or bottom. I've used it in several other private discussions since then. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, he shall reign until all enemies are put under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed, katargeo, is death. So here we have Paul saying that at the parousia, which is the word used in 1 Corinthians 15, 25 and following, at the parousia, that's the end, and that's when death is destroyed, right?
Yes.
Death is destroyed when Satan is destroyed, Revelation 20, but I'll get to that in just a moment. So then we have Revelation chapter 19, which is the coming of the Lord and the destruction of Babylon. This is where it gets really, really, really interesting with the partial preterists. Kenneth Gentry believes the coming of the Lord of Revelation 19 is against Babylon. And guess what? Kenneth Gentry believes that Babylon is Old Covenant
Jerusalem. Yeah.
Jerusalem. Let's see, I did have it laying on my desk here. No, I put it up. Doug Wilson. Guess who Babylon is? Old Covenant Jerusalem. Keith Matheson. Well, actually, he changed his position.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he used to believe that Babylon was Old Covenant Jerusalem. Then in his age to age, he changed to that's Rome. So,
wow.
Yeah. But anyway, an awful lot of your partial preterists believe that Revelation 19 is the coming of the Lord against Babylon. But wait a minute. Revelation 19 is when the false prophet and the beast are thrown into the lake or thrown into the pit. Well, wait a minute. Revelation chapter 20 is the time of the destruction of Satan and the destruction of death. Well, wait a minute. Destruction of death is the parousia. But the parousia is Revelation 19, unless you can insert a 2,000-year gap so far between Revelation 19 and Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following. So we have Paul talking about the end when Satan and death would be destroyed at the end. Someone asked me just recently, well, what is the end in 1 Corinthians 15? I said, well, to me, it cannot be anything except the end of the millennium. I used to say, well, it's the end of the Old Covenant age. Okay, I'm fine with that. I don't have a problem with that. But since Paul is specifically talking about the destruction of death and therefore of Satan in the context of the end, that almost assuredly has to be the end of the millennium. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, even a good all millennials would say, look at the recapitulation between Revelation 19 and Revelation 20.
Greg Real does.
The enemies are all thrown in the lake of fire together. Right. And again, once again, we have the inconsistent hermeneutic of the partial preterist taking Revelation 1 to 19, AD 70. Revelation 21, 22, AD 70. Then we have recapitulation consistently all through these chapters. But then when we get to Revelation 20, verses 5 through 15, oh no, not these verses. They get really upset with the premillennials. And they say, well, you guys, you keep this 1,000 years as kind of like an island separated from Revelation and the rest of the New Testament. And yet they're guilty of doing the same thing with those 10 verses there at the end of the millennium. And it just gets really, really frustrated, and they're not able to harmonize those verses with 1 Corinthians 15, with the Olivet Discourse, 2 Peter 3. I mean, and on it goes.
Yeah. So to me, that consistency between 1 Corinthians 15, parousia, destruction of death, and Satan, Revelation 19, the throwing of the beast and the prophet into the pit, and then chapter 20, the parousia, which has to be the parousia because it's the time of the destruction of Satan and death. That has to be 1 Corinthians 15. And it's the time of the judgment, which was at hand, but the time of the judgment, which was at hand, was AD 70, according to the partial preterists.
Right.
So here, once again, the partial preterist has to go, okay, 1 Corinthians 15, end of the millennium. Revelation 19, AD 70. Revelation chapter 20, 10 and following, end of the millennium, end of time. Revelation chapter 22, verse 12, AD 70.
Right.
I mean, it's absolutely amazing. So those are some great points that you brought out. A little bit of recapitulation, but a little bit of driving the point home of how inconsistent, totally, absolutely inconsistent the partial preterist view really becomes. And of course, those are some things that you and I, in our own personal struggles, had to come to grips with.
Absolutely. I mean, partial preterism drove me crazy. I was so happy initially studying the harmony between the apocalyptic language in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the time text in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I was just like, wow, this is just so refreshing. And then I started having that double vision. I started seeing two of everything. And it just gave me flashbacks to my dispensational days where I had two peoples of God and two different resurrections of the dead and two, all of this. And and I just knew something was wrong, and God, providentially led me in the right direction. But yeah, the inconsistencies just drove me crazy. And again, that's why Doug Wilson doesn't want to answer the questions. So,
and I've said this very, very often. One of the reasons, pardon me, I am convinced one of the reasons that Kenneth Gentry does not want to get on a debate platform with you or with me is because he knows he wouldn't be debating just us. He would be debating his own comments made through the years that he knows very good and well we are intimately familiar with.
Oh yeah, we would be dragging up what he said about Mello in Revelation 1, and not only would they be debating themselves, but they would be debating their colleagues,
yes.
Some of their other partial preterists, because when you add up all the admissions of the partial preterist, you got like 99.5% of full preterism. There's just no other way around it.
Yeah, and yet we have men who jump up here and who boast about the fact, for instance, Sam Frost boasting about the fact that Gary DeMar published his book, and Kenneth Gentry recommended his book, and yet, and of course, Gary DeMar blocked it. So that tells you where Gary DeMar is at in regard to Sam Frost.
I think Gary was just going along with Joel McDermott at the time and kind of let Joel McDermott publish Sam. Gary doesn't want anything to do with anything.
And see, that's the point that I was getting at. And you know very good and well, Kenneth Gentry doesn't really want to have anything to do with Sam Frost either. Because Sam Frost is now at a point where, let me see, Kenneth Gentry says, despite the initial appearances, Revelation chapter 21 is not about the consummation of world history. It's the events of AD 70 when the old bride was put away, divorced, and the new covenant bride came in, fully supplanted the old covenant bride. Sam Frost thinks that's heretical. It's not just wrong, it's heretical.
Yeah, he calls partial preterism hyper partial preterism.
Correct.
So if something is hyper, it's not orthodox.
That's right.
And he says that it's inconsistent. He says Gentry's partial preterism, Doug Wilson's partial preterism is inconsistent, and it's hyper. So,
yeah,
there you have it.
And yet they all want to be buddies and sign a letter.
Oh yeah. They'll use each other. I mean, Gentry will use Sam as kind of their dancing bear, kind of a deflection. Well, I don't have time for you full predators, deal with Sam. Yeah. Well, everybody's pretty much beating up Sam like a pinata, just like they did Thomas Ice. I'm not sure why Sam's any more relevant at this point. But you know, we kind of want the handlers of Sam. I want Matheson, I want Gentry, I want Wilson, I want these guys. I don't want Sam. I don't want the dancing bear. I want the handlers of the dancing bear.
All right. With all of that said, a couple of weeks ago, we touched on the fact that Paul said Christ was the first fruit, and that meant the first fruit of the harvest. Now, we do not have the time this evening to get to everything that is relevant in regard to the motif of the harvest, but Christ is the first fruits. Afterward, those who are Christ at his coming, then comes the end. So you have Christ, the first fruits of the first fruit, you have the first fruit, and then you have the end, the time of the harvest. Okay. In my book, Who Is This Babylon? And in my newest book on Sukkot, I developed the concept of the resurrection. And I got to tell you, Mike, back in the late 70s, the doctrine of the resurrection and its integration with the harvest really started making my head spin around on my shoulders. It was one of those inconsistencies that I started seeing that we were talking about a few moments ago of my own paradigm, that I'm going, something is not working here. Now, here's something that I think that we have to consider. And I pointed out a couple of weeks ago that in 1 Corinthians 15, we have an inclusio between Hosea and the very first of Hosea chapter 6 and Hosea chapter 13. An inclusio, because Paul refers directly to Hosea chapter 6. After 3 days, he will raise us up. That's resurrection. And Hosea chapter 13, O grave, where is your victory? This tells us, this would have told any good, faithful Jew reading Paul is appealing to Hosea for his resurrection doctrine. But what kind of death is Hosea dealing with? Well, let me see. Hosea chapter 5, chapter 6. He has slain us with the word of his mouth. Well, these were living people talking, saying Yahweh had slain them. Okay, that's a little bit troublesome. But here's what I want to get at. In Hosea chapter 8, the Lord said of the 10 northern tribes, they have sown the wind, they will reap the whirlwind. Well, what is this? This is harvest imagery.
Yes. Now, is this the harvest that would be in the last days? Are you in Hosea 6?
I'm in Hosea. I'm going to Hosea chapter 6. I'm talking about the harvest of being swallowed up. Chapter 8, chapter 8, Israel in the Assyrian captivity was swallowed up by the nations. That was her harvest.
Yes, a harvest of judgment.
A harvest of judgment for committing spiritual adultery. Then in Hosea chapter 6, verse 11, the Lord says, and this is where it gets into the messianic aspect of it. The Lord says of Judah, after speaking of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, and their imminent harvest / judgment, the Lord says, and you, O Judah, shall also have your harvest. But then he adds an incredible statement. When I bring back the captivity of my people. In other words, the remnant. Well, the doctrine of the remnant had both a non-eschatological as well as an eschatological significance and application. But here God is saying that when the captivity of Assyria would end, it would be when the captivity itself would end. Well, the captivity of the 10 northern tribes only ended when Xerxes and Ahasuerus, the Persian kings, allowed Israel and Judah to return to the land. But that's not the eschatological harvest of Judah. Judah's harvest would come when the captivity was ended. But if the harvest of Judah is the same as the harvest of Israel, that's her judgment. So what do we find when we come to the New Testament? we find Jesus, well, first of all, we find John the Baptizer
Yes.
as Elijah, warning those who were coming out to him to be baptized of him, saying, who has warned you to flee from the wrath that is about to come? And I think it's significant to take note of what Donald Hagner says in the Word Biblical Commentary. He said the thing that gave John's warning extra force was that he said the judgment was about to come based on mellow. So here's a non-preterist scholar who understood and understands mellow doesn't mean within the next week. Which is a farcical type of definition anyway. So anyway, here we have John saying, who has warned you to flee from the wrath that is about to come? And then in an incredible statement, speaking of Christ, he says his winnowing fork is already in his hands. You know, folks, I read that passage year after year after years. Never saw the force of it until I was reading some historical source. It might have been Smith's Bible Dictionary. I don't remember, to be honest about it. But it was being pointed out. The winnowing fork
Very specific tool.
Is a very specific tool for the end of the harvest. It's not the beginning of it, it's the end of it.
Right.
John is saying, look, folks, the end of the harvest is going to be soon, this generation. Just as he said, the axe is already at the root. And so when you have this harvest imagery that is so imminent, and what kind of harvest is he talking about? Well, let's see. The axe is already at the root. That's not a good thing for a tree. And that goes right back to Hosea, pardon me, Hosea chapter 4, in which the Lord said he was going to destroy the wicked, both root and branch, in the great and the terrible day of the Lord. That would also be the day in which the Lord would arise, the Son would arise with healing in his leaves. So here you find healing for the remnant. You have the destruction of the corporate body and the destruction of both the root and the branch of Israel. That's the time of the harvest, folks. That's what John the Baptizer, as Elijah, who is supposed to come before the coming of the great and the terrible day of the Lord, arrived. Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 and 6. John is Elijah. He was proclaiming, kingdom is at hand, axe is already at the root, the winnowing fork. It's time for the harvest, John said, and the end of the harvest is not long off. And that agrees perfectly with what Jesus said in John chapter 4, verse 35, speaking to his apostles, do not say within yourselves, there are yet 4 months, and then the harvest. For I say to you, lift up your eyes, for the fields are white already unto harvest. So the question needs to be asked, are we talking about two different kinds of harvests here? What kind of harvest is in Matthew chapter 3? Is it not the harvest of John chapter 4? Or is it not the harvest of Matthew chapter 12? When Jesus said, pray therefore that the Lord will send forth reapers, because the harvest is great, but the workers are few. Is that a different kind of harvest? And then, of course, we come to the famous text, Matthew chapter 13, the end of the age harvest. Now, that raises the question, is the end of the age harvest a different harvest from 1 Corinthians 15? Is it a different end of the age harvest from Matthew chapter 3, which, again, John said was about to take place, was imminent?
It was at hand. It was about to take place. Even John Gill of Matthew 3 says in the Old Testament, the harvest imagery, the threshing floor is the land of Israel.
That's right. And let's go further than that. There are any number of really noted, great Reformed commentators who make the same identical observation, and many non-Reformed commentators point out how the very imagery in Matthew chapter 3 And in my book, Elijah Has Come, a solution for Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27. And again, Elijah has come. I give a lot of background, a lot of historical, not only historical, rabbinic, and Old Testament scholars who point out all of this imagery, every image that John uses in Matthew chapter 3, the winnowing fork, the axe at the root, you know, the imagery of who has warned you to flee from the judgment that is about to come. All of that's found in the Old Testament, and it's invariably found in passages dealing with the Old Covenant judgments of Israel. So we're supposed to think that John, as Elijah, is drawing on all of these Old Testament passages dealing with the judgment of Israel for Israel's apostasy, but John's applying it to something radically, totally unrelated to those Old Testament prophecies concerning judgment on Israel.
Yeah. And he was the one that would prepare the way for the judgment of Isaiah 40. And of course, as you've covered, Malachi 3 and 4. But in the Isaiah 40 passage, that's when Christ comes to reward
every man
and the wicked. And now we're back to Matthew 16, 27, 28. For the Son of Man is about to come in the glory of his Father with his angels. Then he will reward each man according to his works. So there again, we see John's eschatology in perfect harmony with Jesus in Isaiah 40, and also, on the harvest motif in Matthew 13 and Matthew 3. And that is another issue. We talked about the inconsistency with Wilson. And again, I'll bring it up again in his debate with Michael Brown, whom we both debated, when he was trying to say, well, the miraculous gifts ended at the end of the Old Covenant age, and he was appealing to Matthew 24:3. Brown came right back and says, well, Matthew 13. See, again, this harmony that other commentators see, that partial preterists just can't work it out without being a full preterist.
Yeah.
And well, what about the end of the age in Matthew 13 then, Doug? That's the resurrection. You'll have to say that the resurrection was fulfilled in AD 70, like those bad full preterists.
Yes.
They want to touch it. So that's the inconsistency problem. Now, Matthew 13, as you know, one of your opponents, Joel McDermott, he took the end of the age there as the Old Covenant age.
And it should not be applied any further than that, was his statement.
Even Peter Leithart in his book on 2 Peter 3, taking 2 Peter 3 is AD 70.
Yep.
He says that harvest was fulfilled at the end of that generation. They don't want to get really specific. They don't want to get into Daniel 12, which is the resurrection of Daniel 12, which is what Jesus is quoting. They just stay away from that as best they can. But of course, you wanted to drill down on that a little bit with Joel McDermott, I think.
I really did, and I enjoyed it, I must say. So to continue a little bit, I won't go any further on that. But and folks, speaking of debate books, there's a debate book that I had with Joel McDermott.
Exactly.
In which we discussed Matthew chapter 13. I had charts on the wall with Joel McDermott's own quotes about Matthew 13, the harvest being AD 70, and it should not be applied to anything beyond that. Well, then what about the harvest of 1 Corinthians 15?
Man, I mean, he even went as far in his book, was it Jesus versus Jerusalem, to say not only Jesus is the end of the age in Jesus's account is the Old Covenant age, but then he got into Paul, and he surrendered just about every end of the age passage in Paul's writings as AD 70 in the Old Covenant age as well. And I'm like, dude, how can you not see what you're doing here?
Okay, to continue. So we have, pardon me, we've got the harvest, which is at the end of the age, and you touched on it ever so briefly. Let me expound on it just a tiny bit more. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 43, at that end of the age, suntelia to aioniou, the righteous would shine forth in the kingdom. That's directly from Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. It's interesting and amazing and revealing that Greg Beale in his massive commentary on New Testament use of Old Testament, commentary on the use of the Old Testament, haws, fudges, and says, well, Matthew 13:43 may be an allusion to Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. Maybe. What's amazing about that is that in the New Testament, he'll have some passages that aren't nearly as specific a quote. And he said, well, this is undoubtedly an echo of the following Old Testament passage. Right. And you're going, well, okay, yeah, I could sort of kind of see that. But when you've got the righteous shining forth at the end of the age in both texts,
right,
well,
it's practically a direct quote.
Yeah, it's a direct quote. And I should point out an awful lot of scholars see it as a correct quote. So here you have this end of the age harvest in Matthew chapter 13. Now watch this. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus predicts the fall of Jerusalem, destruction of the temple. And the apostles immediately ask, tell us what shall be, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming? And of the end of the age. They use the exact same precise term, end of the age, that Jesus talked about for the harvest in Matthew chapter 13, 39 through 43 and verse 49 and 50. Okay, same precise term. And yet we're told the apostles were so terribly confused about what the end of the age might be. I've been going around with Sam Frost on Facebook over the last several days.
Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah. He assumes without one keystroke of proof, not one keystroke of proof, all he does is make an assertion, no exegesis, but he assumes that the end of the age that the apostles were asking about was the end of the current human history. Okay. Well, that's a change. And I accused him. I said, Sam Frost has changed his position on Matthew chapter 24, verse 3 several times. And he came back and he said, you're lying. You can't prove I've ever changed my position. Well, I'm a pretty good record keeper. So I documented, number one, he used to believe when he was still teaching the truth that the apostles understood that the end of the age was AD 70 and would come at the fall of Jerusalem. They understood that. That was Sam Frost number one. Sam Frost number two, in 20 and 19, Sam Frost said, well, it's possible that they weren't thinking about any end of any age. Really? I wonder why they asked about the end of the age. And then, just a couple of months later, he said they were asking about the end of human history. So there's three different positions that Sam Frost took on the apostles and the end of the age on Matthew chapter 24. I documented from his own words, and he still accused me of lying. Now that's pretty illustrative of where Sam Frost is. When you show his own words, quote his own words on Facebook, and he says, I never said that. Well, he never said, I never said that. He just said, you're still lying. No, I wasn't lying at all. I documented. So here's the point, ladies and gentlemen. The apostles are asking about the end of the age, which is the end of the age harvest of Daniel chapter 12, Matthew chapter 13. Then, and remember, we're correlating this absolutely with 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Christ is the first fruits of the harvest. Then comes the end of harvest. That the end is Sukkot, which is the end of the age harvest. And that's, I develop all of this in my book, The Resurrection Feast Fulfilled. So in Matthew 24, the apostles are asking about the end of the age resurrection harvest. And then in Matthew chapter 24, verse 31, then shall the Son of Man send forth his angels, and they shall gather together. That's episynagoge, the elect from the four winds of the heaven to the other. When would that be? At the sound of the great trumpet. Well, folks, this, and by the way, Greg Beale absolutely agrees with this. Absolutely agrees. Matthew chapter 24, 30 and 31, taken directly from Isaiah chapter 27, verse 12 and verse 13. Mm-hmm. At that time, at what time? The time in which The fortified city would be left desolate.
Verse 9.
Verse 9, the altar would be turned into chalkstone, and the people whom the Lord had created would no longer find mercy, because they are people of no understanding, which is a direct quote, by the way, from Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 28, a prediction of Israel's fate in the last days.
When her end would be near.
Exactly right. So here, Jesus, in Matthew chapter 24, is quoting directly from Isaiah 27, 12 and 13, which is all about Sukkot. And again, in my new book, Resurrection Feast Fulfilled, I quote from one source after another, associating Isaiah 27, 12 and 13 with Sukkot. It is the episynagoge, which is Sukkot, the great end gathering, the great harvest. So here's Jesus saying that this time of the episynagoge, the great harvest, end gathering, at the sound of the great trumpet, verse 34, let me see here. Kenneth Gentry agrees. Joel McDermott agreed. Keith Matheson agreed. Doug Wilson agreed. Matthew 24, 29 to 31, AD 70.
And don't forget the incredible admission between James Jordan and Gary DeMar, who have broken from the men that you just mentioned, Matheson, Gentry, Wilson, and are acknowledging the gathering of the elect here is referring to the resurrection of the Old Testament dead ones out of Hades. So now we're back. So now we're back to 1 Corinthians 15.
Absolutely. And once again, Mike, if you and I both had the time to just go text by text, gather the comments of some of the leaders of the partial preterist movement and see how they admit to AD 70 here, and they agree with one another here. Oh, maybe not, and just show in written form. I don't have the time for it. I'm pretty sure you don't have the time for it either, but it would be a great project for you. You're a whole lot younger than I am. But it would be a fantastic project. A good friend of mine named Tom Kloski of the Churches of Christ wrote a book. He and his brother, Steve, wrote a book that thick, chronicling quotes from Church of Christ scholars and preachers and teachers down through the years, giving their preterist quotes that support AD 70 and contradicting each other, and yet they're still in fellowship with each other. Okay, no break of fellowship whatsoever, none whatsoever. Wouldn't think about breaking fellowship. But now when preterists show their inconsistencies and take their comments to their logical end, you ain't nothing but a bunch of heretics.
Well, I've actually done that. I have charts where I
know you've got some of that.
I show all the admissions and how they all add up to full preterism when you take them all together. And so that's what we have here. The harvest. Matthew 3, partial preterist, AD 70, the harvest. Matthew 13, the end of the age is the old covenant age. So that's the harvest, AD 70. We haven't even got into Revelation 7 and Revelation 14, but
we're headed there.
The vineyard harvest is also AD 70. So once again, we have 1 Corinthians 15 is this island unto itself, which just hermeneutically, you can't stand for that. If you truly believe in the analogy of faith, you have to see a harmony here, and they don't want to acknowledge it.
And what's interesting to me, Greg Beals sees that the vindication of the martyrs of Revelation 6 is Revelation 20. He sees the vindication of the martyrs of Revelation chapter 11, AD 70. Revelation 20.
The same, yeah.
I mean, he sees this because he believes, as I do and you do, in the recapitulation narrative in the book of Revelation.
Yep.
And it makes you wonder, okay, how can he go to Revelation chapter 6 and see the development and the application of Isaiah chapter 2.
Don, real quick, he even connects Matthew 23 with Revelation 6 with Revelation 20.
Absolutely. I forgot about that. You're absolutely right. And so you've got a world-class, truly eminent, not near, but prominent scholar admitting to all of these connections. And yet when it comes to Revelation chapter 6, for instance, what does he do? He ignores Jesus's application of Isaiah chapter 2, 19 to 21 to AD 70, ignores it. And yet John in Revelation 6 quotes the very verses that Jesus applied to AD 70, and Beale applies it off here to the future somehow, some way. Now that is a dichotomous hermeneutic. He ignores the fact that in Revelation chapter 6, we have a great and terrible day of the Lord, and who shall stand at his coming? That's directly out of Malachi chapter 3, which is a national judgment against Old Covenant Israel, according to Malachi chapter 3, verse 6, taken from Deuteronomy chapter 22 and Exodus chapter 19, which proves that it is a national judgment because Israel would not, well, they would deprive the Gentiles of their proper place. They practice witchcraft, they practice adultery. Those are all the violations of Torah. And the Lord said, I will put you to the sword. That's national judgment.
Yeah, that's not the globe burning up.
Yeah, it's not the globe burning up, but this is Malachi chapter 3. Who shall stand before the day of his coming? And Joyce Baldwin and a host of other Old Testament scholars writing on Malachi says the words that are used in Malachi chapter 3 are words that are used only in application of judgment. When it says the Lord shall come suddenly to his temple, and who shall stand before him when he comes, purely judgment. Never used in any other sense. And again, that's in Joyce Baldwin's commentary on the book of Malachi. And so what you have in Hosea chapter 6 is you have these repeated allusions to passages that are undeniably references to AD 70. Greg Beale just rips it completely out of those contexts, just like in Revelation chapter 11. The judgment at the sounding, the resurrection at the sounding of the seventh trumpet, which, oh, by the way, just coincidentally, I guess, happens to be the last trumpet of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 52.
Right.
And it all happens at the time of the destruction of the city where the Lord was crucified. So Beale slips 2,000 years between Revelation chapter 11, verse 10, and verse 14, and verse 15, and the sounding of the seventh trumpet. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible what these men do,
yeah,
to hold on to their creeds, their traditions, or their scholarly position, if you please.
Yeah.
Many of them, I am absolutely convinced. I'm absolutely convinced you are too. Many of them know exactly what they're doing. I hate to say that, but when you read so many of their comments, then you say, how can you say that and not see this?
Absolutely.
When
I was on the phone with Beale, John Anderson had him, and they were doing a thing on his new book on the temple and the mission of the church, I think it was. And I called in and I said, so in your book, which I'm reading, I love your book. I'm going to use it for a conference lecture. I said, but I notice here that you say that the Jews understood the land of Israel to be heaven and earth, and even the temple. And I said, well, in the Olivet Discourse, the whole context is the destruction of the temple that they're looking at. So why wouldn't verse 35, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not be? Why won't that be? Why isn't that referring to the old covenant age or the temple or the land? And he just went irate. You must be a hyper preterist. I'm like, dude, one of your co-authors takes Matthew 24:35 as the temple, heaven and earth there as the temple. and he sees it, but here's another guy that won't debate, that won't.
No. I challenged him to his face, standing on a platform in Oklahoma City. Well, actually, I did it at the microphone from the audience, first of all. And then I joined him on the stage afterwards. And I said, I really would love to debate you. And he said, well, I know, Don. He said, and I'll think about it. I'll think about it. Well, I contacted him later. Well, I'm just too busy.
Oh, yeah. They're always too busy.
Yeah. So look, folks, when you see the harmony of the harvest doctrine all the way from Hosea, and Hosea is not the only Old Testament passage by any means, but when you see the harmony of the doctrine of the harvest carried right through 1 Corinthians 15 and emphasized by Paul that Christ was the first fruits of the harvest. How do you separate that from all of these other references? Harvest at the destruction of Babylon, Revelation 14. Harvest at the end of the age of AD 70, according to Daniel chapter 12. Harvest that was already ongoing, and the end of it was at hand, Matthew chapter 3. How do you separate that without doing extreme violence? You've got to be able to give solid hermeneutical and exegetical proof. And Mike and I haven't seen any of that proof so far. We've seen a whole lot of ranting and raving and name calling and what have you, but we haven't seen the proof. And with that, you know what, Mike, we're completely out of time.
We'll see you next Friday.
All right, folks, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it so very much. Like I said, be sure to like it. Be sure to share this program with as many as you can. Let's continue to grow this viewership, and we appreciate it so much. And with that, Mike, good night, brother.
All right, man. Take care.
That I may walk before my God in the light, in the light of life, 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 in the